Sup boys? So after a lot of begging and pleading from the community, miHoYo has finally buffed some reactions in Genshin Impact, and that is actually pretty helpful. Now, more specifically, they did buff the transformative reactions like Overload, Superconduct, Swirl, Shattered, things like that. And the only small caveat that they imposed on us is that you do have to be at level 60 and above, so you do actually have to ascend into Ascension 4 before you can really see the benefits of this buff. Now, the reason that this is quite helpful is simply because the transformative reactions don't necessarily define a team a lot of times. They're essentially just extra damage on top of whatever the main goal of your team is. Like, you don't really run a Superconduct team most of the time. You're just running Superconduct to get the physical resistance shred because your physical DPS needs to do more physical damage. Although, of course, there are caveats to that, but generally you don't run transformative reactions as the main point of your team. So if you would like to know the basics of why this buff is important, it would probably be helpful to understand the basics of transformative reactions, which I've done a 7-part series all on damage and how it all factors into Genshin, basically how the entire formula works for all of the different various types of damage, which I'll definitely leave a link to that on the screen somewhere in the corners. And it'll also be in the description as well. But just as a small recap, just to get our brains working, Elemental Mastery basically adds a bonus to the base damage that a reaction would typically do. Character level is a main factor in these transformative reactions. Enemy resistance does actually play a factor here. Artifact sets can actually add extra damage to these transformative reactions with set bonuses. And it's also important to note that transformative reactions do not crit. Now, thanks to the wonderful Kaching Mains Theory crafters, they have already actually cracked the formula for this, and they also made a little graph that actually shows the difference in your reaction based damage. Now, if you'd like access to this spreadsheet, I will leave a link down in the description for that. Now, if you notice, what they've outlined for us here is the old 1.5 transformative formula and the new 1.6 formula. There's two major changes going on here. One, the fraction portion that takes into account Elemental Mastery has had a significant buff to the numerator and a slight buff to the denominator. And the cubic expression that goes into the level multiplier has also been changed quite a bit. Now, the fraction portion directly correlates to the bonus that you actually see under the attributes section of your character sheet. And this new formula should be really close to what you might see, but there could be a slight variance of maybe like 0.1% somewhere. I did notice a couple of times on my testing that there was a slight variance, but it's still really extremely close. And then the cubic expression directly correlates to the base damage that you should see for whatever level you're currently at, which, keep in mind, at least level 60 and above. And this is actually the exact same setup from the previous formula that we already had been using. So if you've seen the previous videos leading up to this one, you'll know that I do have a damage calculator, and it's got a lot of different sheets on it according to whichever video you're on to kind of help you see some examples. To keep that kind of theme going, I did add a couple of sheets to this one so that you can kind of see what's going on in this video. Just keep in mind, I didn't change anything from the previous videos, simply so that the integrity of those videos stays intact. And as you go further down the rabbit hole of the playlist, you can kind of see the changes as they happen, like in this video or in any future videos that they may change things, and I'll cover that as well. Anyways, let's take a look at some examples. All right, so our first reaction that we're actually going to take a look at is Overload. So as you can see here, we're using Fischl's Charge Shot to actually apply it. And then once we actually hit Diluc's Elemental Skill, you can see two damage numbers pop up. We have Overloaded, which is more of like the pinkish color. And then we have the actual Pyro skill that applies 729 damage. Overload ends up doing 1,996. So if we actually take a look at the spreadsheet, this is my damage calculator. This is the page called 1.6 Transformative Buff Examples. In this example here, you can see we have that 1,996 damage. We are Overload reaction. This Diluc does have 65 Elemental Mastery. You can see he does have level 69 on his level, and a Helichurl's Elemental Resistance to Pyro is 10%, so the Overload ends up having a 10% enemy resistance on it. As you can kind of see, this Overload ends up doing that 1996, and the actual damage that the spreadsheet is trying to to calculate is 1,997. So as I stated in previous videos, and hopefully I stated it a little earlier in this video, the final damage is going to be roughly the same. It's not going to be exactly the same on every single example because we are doing some rounding, because we are using percentages and stuff like that. Just the nature of the spreadsheets and the way that these formulas are going to work, it's going to get you really close, but it may not be exactly. And I actually have an example that's kind of off, but it's still within that 10 damage tolerance. So our next example in the spreadsheet is actually going to be Lisa going up against a Whopper Flower. Now the reason that this one is important is because Whopper Flowers have a resistance to cryo. Specifically, the cryo Whopper Flowers have a cryo resistance, pyro has pyro resistance. What that ends up doing is it changes the damage significantly if it's done against a cryo Whopper Flower because it does resist the damage. To illustrate that, we have Lisa here, and we're going to see once this cryo flower goes into that shielded stance, he's going to apply cryo to himself, and then we'll be able to hit it with our normal attack, and we should apply that superconduct. Here we go. Boom. All right, so we have 52 damage from Lisa's skill, and then you'll see the 84 right underneath. That is actually the superconduct damage. It's kind of hard to see. Obviously, Lisa cannot apply cryo damage to this Whopper Flower. She doesn't have a way to do that. Therefore, that is our superconduct damage. Now, if we actually go over to our spreadsheet here, you can see Lisa with the Whopper Flower. We do have 52 and the 84. We are doing superconduct at 48 elemental mastery. We do have 60 on the character level. Enemy resistance is at 75%. It does have 75% resistance to any kind of cryo damage. And you can see that the final estimated damage is going to be 84 for this particular example. Now our next reaction is actually going to be electrocharged. So what we're going to be doing here is applying the wet status with Barbara, and then we use Razor's elemental skill to apply the electrocharged, and there you can see we actually have two different damages here. 196 actually comes from our skill, and the 953 listed there is what comes from the electrocharged. If we swap back over here, you can see we do have the same 196, 953 electrocharge. This Razor does have 25 elemental mastery. He is level 69, and that Hilitrol, as we've seen before, does have 10%. Now this one, it has 953 up there, and it shows 954 here, so it is just slightly off yet again, but still within that 10% damage tolerance. So looking pretty good. Next, we actually have a reaction with Barbara applying the wet status, and then we have Sucrose applying swirl. Now there is going to be two short examples here. The first one is going to be with Sucrose using the Viridescent Veneer artifact set. So she is actually going to get that resistance shred on the enemy because it does infuse with that element. The spreadsheet does not take into account that. It has the option to, but I haven't actually worked that in. Hopefully I can work that in before this video goes live, and you can actually, mess with it if you want to. But essentially we're going to see two different things here. So you'll see Barbara applies the wet status. Swirl ends up, obviously Sucrose cannot proc hydro damage, therefore she swirls for 1,886 damage. Now that is not going to correlate very well with what's actually in the spreadsheet. So this is the example after removing one of the artifacts to remove that 4-piece set bonus from Viridescent Veneer. You can see we applied the wet status with Barbara. And once we actually apply swirl, you can see, obviously, again, she can't do hydro damage. So 1316 is the final damage. And this one is the most off that I have in the entire spreadsheet, but it still somehow is within that 10% damage tolerance. So we are doing swirl. The Sucrose does have 655 on the elemental mastery. She is level 60, and the Hilitrol does have a 10% resistance. So total, we end up with 1,307 on the damage, where in game we actually had 1316. So again, slightly off, but still really close. Now, if you want to mess with the Viridescent Veneer set, under this drop down box, I do have a couple of different artifact sets. It looks like I already need to fix this, so I'll fix this before the video comes out. But if you actually choose like one of these sets, it will actually determine if the reaction that you're using is buffed by that specific set. There should be some more sets in here, but I will actually go in and I'll change it for Veritas and Veneer because that should actually be reducing the resistance shred by 40%. I'll go in and fix that. All right, and our final reaction that we need to take a look at is Shattered. We apply wet status, and then we're gonna do Kaya to freeze, and then once we freeze, we're just gonna hit that enemy. Now you'll notice 1,444 shows up here, but that is the actual talent damage. And then just underneath, it's really hard to see, get on a frame that you can kind of see it here. It should be 1,497 for the actual shatter damage. You can see Shattered, we do have 65 Elemental Mastery, just like we saw earlier. Level 69, 10% resistance to physical damage, and then the final estimated damage would be 1,497. So spreadsheet is up to date and it's working. Once you actually hop onto the spreadsheet, you are going to be greeted with this page. This is just like a, hey, here's how you can kind of expect these pages to work. If you want to edit this for yourself, every time I make an update to it, you do have to make a new copy of it for yourself. But if you're watching this video and you've used this in the past, all you have to do is go File, make a copy, and it'll literally copy it to your own Google account so that you can edit it. But yeah, once you do that, you can actually go through. All of these are links to the videos. This one will be updated as soon as this video goes live. And then from there, you can kind of play around with it. The most recent additions are, of course, these last two pages. This is the exact same look as the previous one. It's just with slightly updated information. And of course, the updated formulas and stuff. And then all of the examples that we just looked at are here as well. Another notable change that I did make is this particular page. If you watch the previous video in the series about attack versus elemental mastery, that basically deals with amplified reactions mainly, the amount of numbers that were on this sheet were totaling like 100,000 cells. There was way too many cells. It was making the spreadsheet extremely slow. I moved all those numbers over to a separate sheet. If you even care to look there, you can. Basically, it's just a huge list of numbers for just literally if you want to pick through and find exact combinations for how much elemental mastery versus attack you should run. Just know that that stuff has moved. That's the only other thing that I've changed. Everything else is the exact same as it always has been, so it should be very familiar if you've used it before. If not, it's super easy to use. And again, you can just go through and you can use each one of these videos to kind of understand all of the different pages. And yeah, should be pretty good from there. So all in all, I think that the buff was pretty decent to transformative reactions. I still think there's an innate problem with some of the reactions that still could be worked on, like overload on smaller enemies, blowing them away. Electrocharge is still pretty finicky sometimes. So it's okay. It's a decent buff for now. Like I said, most of this damage is passive damage. It's not like you're doing these reactions as the main focus of your team, unless for whatever reason you just are that type of person, which cool. You know, you got a big buff for your damage. Otherwise, you're just kind of using these reactions to supplement the damage that you're already doing. Either way, hopefully this video shed some light on the changes to the elemental mastery buffs. Hopefully this is a start for what could be even better. And now it's time to, I gotta go make a video about Traveler, because you guys need to start working on your Traveler if you haven't. See ya.